The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of red dust, and Clara Bennett clutched her worn leather valise tighter against her chest. Through the dirty window, she could see the outline of a man waiting by the depot, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. This wasn't Luther Briggs. She'd memorized every detail of that devil's face from the tintype he'd sent. And this man was someone else entirely. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver called down. "Redemption Creek." Clara smoothed her travel-stained dress and stepped down onto the packed earth, her legs unsteady after 3 days of bone-jarring travel from Kansas City. The Arizona sun hit her like a slap, nothing like the gentle warmth of Philadelphia she'd left behind 2 years ago when Thomas died. The man by the depot straightened and walked toward her with the measured gait of someone who'd spent more time in a saddle than on foot. "Mrs. Bennett?" His voice was low, rough as sandpaper. "I'm Wyatt Boone. I'm here to take you out to the ranch." Clara's fingers found the small weight hidden in her valise, the Derringer she'd bought in St. Louis with the last of her savings. "I was told Mr. Briggs would meet me. Luther got called away on business, asked me to fetch you." Wyatt's eyes, she noticed, were the color of winter sky, pale blue and distant. He reached for her bags, and she saw the calluses on his hands, the sun-darkened skin that spoke of honest work. "It's a half-day's ride to the Double B, Luther's ranch, where she was supposed to start her new life as a mail-order bride." The thought made bile rise in her throat, but she forced a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He loaded her 2 bags onto a buckboard wagon waiting in the shade of the depot. The vehicle had seen better days. Its blue paint faded and chipped, but the horses were well fed and their coats gleamed with care. Wyatt helped her up onto the bench seat, his touch brief and impersonal, then swung up beside her. As they rolled out of town, Clara studied him from beneath her bonnet. He couldn't be more than 35. With deep lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His clothes were clean but worn, brown canvas pants, a blue shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He handled the reins with an easy competence that made her think of Thomas, though her late husband had been a banker who'd never driven anything rougher than a Sunday carriage. "First time in the territory?" Wyatt asked after they left the last building behind. "Yes." Clara watched the landscape unfold, endless stretches of scrub brush and cacti, red rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, mountains purple in the distance. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. "It's very different from home." "Where's home?" "Was Philadelphia." She emphasized the past tense. There was nothing for her there now. Thomas's family had made that clear when they'd discovered his debts and blamed her for not keeping a tighter rein on his spending. Wyatt nodded, but didn't press. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. "How do you know Mr. Briggs?" Clara finally asked, needing information. "We've done business. He runs cattle. I run cattle. Man needs neighbors out here." His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Clara's hand drifted to her valise again. Inside, along with the gun, was Luther's last letter, the one where he'd promised her a good life, a fresh start, a chance to be more than a burden on her deceased husband's disapproving family. She'd been desperate enough to believe him, to sell her wedding ring and board that train west. But the other women on the journey, other mail-order brides heading to their own uncertain futures, had whispered stories about men who saw these arrangements as purchasing livestock rather than finding partners, stories about women who disappeared. "You lived here long, Mr. Boone." 10 years, give or take. Came out after the war. A veteran, then. She could see it in the way he held himself, alert even in repose. "Confederate or Union?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Union. Cavalry." They stopped at midday to water the horses at a spring tucked between 2 red rocks. Wyatt helped her down, then busied himself with the animals while she found a private spot to attend to necessities. When she returned, he'd laid out a simple meal on a flat rock, cold biscuits, dried beef, and a canteen of water. "It's not fancy," he said, almost apologetically. "It's fine, thank you." Clara bit into a biscuit, surprised to find it was good, flavored with bacon drippings. "Did you make these?" "This morning." He seemed embarrassed by the admission. "Don't have a cook at my place." "Your place? I thought we were going to the Double B." Wyatt paused in checking the horse's hooves. "We are. I've got a spread about 5 miles north of Luther's, the Circle H." Clara filed this information away. A neighbor who could be an ally, or another enemy. She couldn't afford to trust anyone yet. As afternoon wore on, the heat became oppressive. Clara's dress, appropriate for a Philadelphia autumn, was stifling in the desert sun. Sweat trickled down her spine, and she envied Wyatt his simple clothes. He seemed unaffected by the temperature, though she noticed he kept glancing at her with something like concern. "There's a hat in the back," he said finally. "Might help with the sun." She found it. A man's hat, too large for her, but the wide brim provided blessed relief. "Thank you." Was my partner's. He won't mind. The use of past tense wasn't lost on her. Death was everywhere in this hard country. It seemed. The landscape began to change as they descended into a valley. Cottonwoods appeared along a creek bed, their leaves rustling in the slight breeze. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see buildings taking shape. A main house, barn, various outbuildings clustered like a small village. "That's the Double B," Wyatt said. It was larger than she'd expected, more prosperous looking. The main house was adobe, 2 stories with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Green shutters framed the windows, and someone had planted roses by the front door, a touch of civilization in the wilderness. "It's quite grand," Clara said, her heart sinking. A successful ranch meant Luther had power, influence. It would make her task harder. "Luther does well for himself." Something in Wyatt's tone made her look at him sharply, but his expression gave nothing away. As they pulled up to the house, Clara's pulse quickened. This was it, the beginning of her deception. She touched the valise again, feeling the hard outline of the derringer. She'd practiced with it during the journey, firing at bottles beside the tracks during stops. She could put all 5 shots in a target at 10 paces, but Luther wasn't there. Instead, a Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Senor Wyatt, you bring the lady." "Si, I brought her. Rosa, this is Mrs. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett. Rosa runs the house." Rosa's dark eyes assessed Clara shrewdly. "Aye, so young to be a widow. Come, you must be tired. I have a room ready." Wyatt unloaded Clara's bags and carried them inside, Clara and Rosa following. The interior was cool and dim, with thick walls keeping out the heat. The furniture was good quality, shipped from back east, and paintings of desert landscapes decorated the walls. "Senor Luther, he say you stay in the blue room," Rosa said, leading them upstairs. "Very nice, faces the mountains." The room was indeed nice, a 4-poster bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a small writing desk by the window. Wyatt set her bags down and turned to go. "Mr. Boone," Clara called. "When will Mr. Briggs return?" He paused in the doorway, and for a moment she thought she saw something, concern, warning, flicker across his face. "Can't say for certain, but don't worry. Mrs. Bennett, you're safe here." After he left, Clara stood at the window watching his wagon disappear into the dust. Safe. It was an odd thing to say, unless he knew she had reason to feel unsafe. She opened her valise and took out the derringer, checking the loads one more time before hiding it beneath the mattress. Luther Briggs had taken everything from her dignity, her future, her freedom to choose. He'd promised her to a man she'd never met, sold her like cattle at auction. But Luther had made one mistake. He'd underestimated the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose. Clara unpinned her hair and let it fall around her shoulders, then poured water into the basin to wash the travel dust from her face. In the mirror, a stranger looked back, hollow-eyed, sharp-cheeked, aged beyond her 26 years. but alive, still alive, despite everything. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains blood red. Somewhere out there, Luther Briggs was conducting his business, unaware that his mail-order bride had arrived with murder in her heart. And somewhere closer, Wyatt Boone was riding home to his empty ranch, probably thinking he'd done his good deed for the day. Clara touched the glass, leaving a fingerprint on the reflection of her face. Neither man knew what was coming, but soon enough, they'd learn that some women couldn't be bought, sold, or broken. Some women came west to survive. Clara Bennett had come west for revenge. The morning sun crept through the lace curtains, and Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the weight of the derringer beneath her mattress brought reality crashing back. 3 days had passed since her arrival at the Double B, and still no word from Luther Briggs. Rosa kept saying, "Any day now," but Clara caught the worried looks the housekeeper exchanged with the ranch hands. Something wasn't right. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Senora Bennett, Senor Wyatt is here." Clara's pulse quickened. She dressed quickly in her simplest day dress, a brown calico that wouldn't show trail dust, and pinned her hair into a severe bun. When she descended the stairs, she found Wyatt in the parlor, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable among the fine furniture. "Mrs. Bennett." He nodded. "Rosa says you haven't been eating much. Thought you might like to see more of the ranch, get some fresh air." "That's kind of you." Clara studied his face, searching for ulterior motives, but found only what seemed like genuine concern. "Mr. Briggs wouldn't object. Luther left me in charge of things while he's away. Showing you around falls under that." They rode out together. Clara on a gentle mare Rosa's husband Miguel had saddled for her. She'd learned to ride as a girl in Philadelphia. Those side-saddle, ungroomed park paths bore little resemblance to this. Wyatt watched her carefully at first, then seemed to relax when he saw she could handle the horse. "You ride well," he observed. "My father kept horses, before he lost everything in the Panic of '73. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She didn't want to share anything real with this man, but something about the vast sky and empty land made honesty harder to resist. Wyatt didn't press for details, just nodded as if he understood about losing everything. They rode along the creek, where cottonwoods provided patches of shade and cattle stood knee-deep in the slow-moving water. "The Double B runs about 3,000 head," Wyatt explained. "Luther built it up from nothing over 15 years. Smart businessman. You sound like you admire him." Wyatt's expression hardened slightly. "I respect what he's built. The man himself." He trailed off, then seemed to change direction. "You should know how things work out here, Mrs. Bennett. It's not like back east. The law's a day's ride away, and men make their own justice. Women need to be careful. Are you warning me about something, Mr. Boone?" He reined in his horse and looked at her directly. "I'm saying this isn't Philadelphia. Different rules apply." They stopped for lunch at a line shack, a small cabin used by cowboys working far from the main ranch. Wyatt built a fire and made coffee while Clara unpacked the food Rosa had sent. Cold chicken, cornbread, pickled vegetables. They ate in companionable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "Why aren't you married, Mr. Boone?" The question surprised them both. Clara hadn't meant to ask it. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Was engaged once. She died. Influenza. Winter of '78. I'm sorry. Long time ago." He threw the coffee grounds into the fire. "Why did you answer Luther's advertisement?" Clara had practiced this lie until it felt almost true. "A widow has few options. My husband's family made it clear I wasn't welcome. When I saw Mr. Briggs' notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer, it seemed like a chance to start over. A lot of women come west for that, fresh starts." His tone was neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he didn't entirely believe her story. Not all of them find what they're looking for. They rode back as afternoon shadows lengthened. Clara's body ached from the unaccustomed exercise, but she didn't complain. She was learning the lay of the land, memorizing landmarks, understanding the ranch's routines, all information she might need later. As they neared the main house, a rider approached at full gallop, one of the ranch hands, a young man named Johnny who tipped his hat to her every morning. "Mr. Wyatt, trouble at the north pasture. Rustlers hit the herd last night, took maybe 50 head. Wyatt's whole demeanor changed. The quiet, careful man vanished, replaced by someone hard and dangerous. "Anyone hurt? Tom caught a bullet in the shoulder. He'll live, but he's laid up. Get Miguel and 3 others. We ride in an hour." He turned to Clara. "I'll see you safely to the house. I can make it alone. Go." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tell Rosa to keep the doors locked tonight. I'll post a man to watch the house." Clara watched him ride away, noting the Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard, the way his hand rested near his sidearm. This was the real West. Violent, lawless, where cattle theft could mean killing, where a woman alone was vulnerable in ways she'd never imagined in her comfortable Philadelphia life. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch, horses nickering, coyotes calling in the distance, the creak of the windmill. Around midnight, hoofbeats approached. She crept to the window and saw Wyatt's distinctive silhouette in the moonlight, checking on the guard he'd posted. Their eyes met across the darkness. She didn't know how he'd known she was watching, but he touched his hat brim before riding away. The gesture was oddly comforting. Days passed in a similar pattern. Wyatt came by each morning, sometimes to take her riding, sometimes just to check that all was well. He taught her things without seeming to: how to read the weather and cloud formations, which plants the cattle wouldn't eat, how to tell if a horse was favoring a leg. "You're not what I expected," he said one afternoon as they watched a spectacular sunset from a ridge overlooking the valley. "What did you expect?" "Someone softer, more helpless." He glanced at her hands, which had developed calluses from handling the reins. "You adapt quick." Clara thought of the derringer hidden in her room, of the revenge burning in her chest. Women are stronger than men think. Mr. Boone. Starting to see that. She learned about him in fragments, how he'd come west after the war, unable to stomach the aftermath of so much killing, how he'd worked for other ranchers before saving enough to buy his own small spread, how his fiancée, Mary, had been a schoolteacher who'd made him read books in the evening, trying to smooth his rough edges. "She'd have liked you," he said once, then seemed embarrassed by the admission. Clara felt an unwelcome flutter in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. Wyatt Boone was supposed to be nothing, a minor player in her drama of revenge. But his quiet strength, his careful kindness, his way of looking at her like she was a person rather than a possession, it was all dangerously appealing. One evening, a storm blew in from the mountains. Clara stood on the porch watching lightning split the sky while thunder rattled the windows. Wyatt appeared beside her, having come to check on the house as he always did when weather threatened. "Beautiful," she breathed, watching the rain sweep across the desert in silver curtains. "Dangerous too. Flash floods can take a man and horse in seconds." They stood together, not quite touching but close enough that she could smell leather and soap, the faint hint of tobacco. When the wind gusted, driving rain onto the porch, Wyatt shifted to shield her with his body, an unconscious gesture of protection that made her throat tight. "I should go in," she said. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "When Luther comes back, be careful. You keep warning me. What aren't you telling me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Luther Briggs gets what he wants, always has, and what he wants isn't always good for folks." "Then why do you work with him?" "Out here, you work with whoever's necessary to survive. Doesn't mean you'll like it." He turned to face her fully. "Just remember, if you need help, my ranch is 5 miles north. Follow the creek until you see a rock formation looks like a church steeple. The Circle H is just beyond." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding through the rain to his horse. Clara touched her lips, imagining what it would be like to kiss him, this man who was everything Luther Briggs wasn't: honest, protective, kind. She shook her head. angry at her own weakness. She hadn't come here for romance. She'd come for justice. But as she prepared for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Wyatt had said her name, soft and careful, like it was something precious. The next morning brought news. One of Luther's men had ridden in during the night. The boss would return within the week. Clara's time of peaceful pretense was ending. Soon, she'd have to face the man who'd destroyed her life. Her hand found the familiar shape of the derringer as she practiced drawing it from her pocket, aiming at her reflection in the mirror. But now, when she imagined pulling the trigger, she saw Wyatt's face, disappointed, horrified. Learning the woman he'd been protecting was a killer, the thought shouldn't matter, but it did. The post rider arrived just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Clara watched from her window as Miguel took the mail pouch, sorting through letters and parcels. She dressed quickly and was downstairs when Rosa brought in the mail, pretending casual interest while her heart hammered. "Letter for you, Senora," Rosa said, handing her an envelope. Clara recognized her sister's handwriting and retreated to the parlor to read in private. But it wasn't just family news that Margaret had sent. Tucked inside was a newspaper clipping from the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated 2 months prior. Local businessman Luther Briggs expands Western ventures. The entrepreneur, known for his cattle interests in Arizona Territory, has been linked to allegations of improper contracts involving Eastern women seeking employment in the West. The article was carefully worded, but Clara read between the lines. Others were beginning to suspect what she already knew, that Luther's mail-order bride service was something far darker. She burned the clipping in the fireplace, watching her sister's worried postscript curl into ash. "Come home, Clara. Whatever you're planning isn't worth it." That afternoon, while helping Rosa with household tasks, Clara overheard 2 ranch hands talking by the kitchen window. "Boss is holed up at the Velvet Dollar in Tombstone," one said. "Jake saw him at the faro table, dropping money like water. That ain't like Mr. Briggs. He's tighter than bark on a tree usually. Maybe that business in Tucson went bad. You hear about that girl from Illinois? Family's making noise, saying she disappeared after answering his advertisement." Clara's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. Another woman. How many had there been? Best not to repeat such talk. The older hand warned. "Mr. Briggs has a long memory and a short temper." That evening, Wyatt didn't come. Clara found herself watching for him, irritated by her own disappointment. She was becoming too dependent on his visits, too comfortable with his quiet presence. When Rosa mentioned he'd gone to Prescott on business, Clara felt oddly bereft. She retreated to her room early, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself at the writing desk, penning a letter she'd never send. "Dear Thomas, I wonder if you can see me from wherever you are. Would you recognize the woman I've become? You knew me as soft, trusting Clara who believed in the goodness of people. That woman died when I learned what you'd done. The debts, the lies, the paper you signed selling my future to clear your gambling losses." She stopped writing, crumpling the paper. Thomas was beyond her anger now, but Luther Briggs, who'd bought her husband's note, who'd forced her into this devil's bargain, he was still breathing. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, trying to be quiet. Clara grabbed the derringer and crept to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Said she's in the blue room. Pretty little widow, ripe for the picking. Boss won't like you sniffing around his property. Carl. Boss ain't here, is he? Besides, maybe I'm doing him a favor, testing the goods." Clara's blood turned to ice. She heard the doorknob rattle and blessed Rosa for insisting on good locks. The men whispered urgently. Then footsteps retreated. Clara spent the rest of the night in a chair facing the door, gun in her lap. At first light, she saddled the mare herself and rode hard for the Circle H. She remembered Wyatt's directions, follow the creek until the church steeple rock. The morning sun was brutal already, and she'd forgotten a hat in her haste. By the time she saw the distinctive rock formation, she was dizzy with heat. The Circle H was smaller than the Double B, but neater somehow. The adobe house was modest but well-maintained, with a vegetable garden protected by a fence and morning glories climbing the porch posts. A dog announced her arrival, bringing a Mexican man from the barn. "I need to speak with Mr. Boone," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Senor Wyatt in Prescott. Back tomorrow, maybe." Clara's strength chose that moment to fail. She swayed in the saddle, and the next thing she knew, strong hands were lifting her down, carrying her into blessed shade. She woke on a settee in a simple parlor, a wet cloth on her forehead. The Mexican man's wife was speaking soft Spanish, pressing a cup of water to Clara's lips. "You rest," the woman said in accented English. "Too hot for riding. You stay until cool." Clara stayed. She dozed fitfully, dreaming of footsteps in hallways and Thomas's guilty face the night before he died. When she woke again, the sun was low and Wyatt was there, still dusty from the trail, his face tight with concern. "Maria says you rode here alone, in this heat, without a hat." His voice was controlled, but she could see anger in the set of his shoulders. "What happened?" She told him about the men in the hallway. His expression darkened with each word. "Carl Hutchins," he said when she finished. "Been warning Luther about him. Man's trouble." He stood abruptly. "You're staying here tonight. I'll send word to Rosa." "I can't impose—" "Yes, you can." The firmness in his tone surprised them both. He softened slightly. "The house has 3 bedrooms. Maria and Jose live in the back. You'll be safe." She stayed. Maria made a simple supper of beans and tortillas, and they ate together at the kitchen table like a family. Wyatt spoke easily with his employees in a mixture of English and Spanish, and Clara saw how they respected him, not from fear but from genuine regard. After dinner, he showed her to a small, clean room with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed covered with a beautiful woven blanket. "Was Mary's room," he said quietly. "She stayed here sometimes before she died." "Wyatt, Lock the door. I'll be in the parlor if you need anything." But Clara couldn't sleep. Near midnight, she found him on the porch, sitting in darkness with a cup of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without turning. She sat in the other chair, pulling her wrapper close against the night chill. "I keep thinking about what those men said, about other women. How many has Luther—" She couldn't finish. "Too many." Wyatt's voice was hard. "But proving it's another matter. He's careful, uses different names, moves the women through different towns. By the time families start asking questions, the trail's cold. You knew what he was when you brought me to the ranch. Suspected, didn't know for certain until I saw you." He turned to look at her in the moonlight. "You're not like the others. You're not here because you believe his promises." Clara's hand moved unconsciously to where the derringer would be if she'd brought it. "What makes you say that?" "The way you watch everything, memorizing details, the way you ask questions, the way you look when someone mentions his name. Not like a bride waiting for her groom." They sat in silence, listening to coyotes singing in the distance. Finally, Clara made a decision. "My husband owed Luther money, gambling debts. When Thomas died, Luther claimed I was collateral for the loan. Said he'd ruin me, have me arrested for Thomas's debts. Unless I honored the agreement Thomas signed, I was to come west and be whatever Luther wanted me to be." Wyatt's knuckles went white around his coffee cup. "That's why you came, not for a new life." "I came to kill him." The words hung between them like a challenge. "He destroyed my life, turned me into property to be bought and sold. I won't let him do it to anyone else." She expected shock, perhaps disgust. Instead, Wyatt was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "The war taught me a lot about killing. Mostly that it's easier to start than to stop, and that it changes a person in ways that can't be undone. Some people deserve to die. Maybe so. But do you deserve to be the one who kills them?" He stood, looking down at her with something like sadness. "Luther Briggs is a bad man. Clara, but you're not a killer. I've known both kinds. You're not a killer." She wanted to argue, to insist he was wrong, but sitting there in the peaceful darkness of his porch, with the scent of night blooming cereus in the air and his steady presence beside her, she felt her certainty waver. What else can I do? Let him win. There's always another way. Question is whether you're willing to look for it. He went inside then, leaving her alone with the stars and her troubled thoughts. When she finally sought her bed, she dreamed not of revenge but of Wyatt's hands, gentle as they'd carried her from the sun, strong as they'd gripped his cup when she told her story, careful as they'd shown her which door was hers. In the morning, he would take her back to the Double B. Luther would return soon, and she would have to decide, was she the woman with the gun? Or was she the woman Wyatt Boone seemed to see when he looked at her? The question kept her awake until dawn painted the mountains rose and gold, beautiful and harsh as everything in this unforgiving land. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by a sweating rider who'd pushed his mount hard from Tombstone. Clara's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Recognizing Luther's bold scrawl, "My dear bride-to-be, business has delayed me longer than anticipated. I trust Boone has been seeing to your comfort. I shall return by week's end to claim what is mine. Prepare yourself. L.B." The words, "claim what is mine," made her stomach turn. She burned the letter and spent the afternoon helping Rosa in the kitchen, kneading bread with perhaps more violence than necessary. "You are troubled, Senora," Rosa observed, her dark eyes knowing. "Mr. Briggs returns soon." Rosa crossed herself quickly. "See, I know. Maybe you take ride. Clear your head?" Clara did ride, but not aimlessly. She discovered an abandoned line shack near the southern boundary, half hidden by a stand of Palo Verde trees. Inside, she'd hidden her derringer and spent hours practicing her draw, firing at targets she'd set up, tin cans, playing cards, circles drawn on wood. Her aim was true. Thomas had taught her to shoot during their courtship, one of the few useful things he'd done. She could put all 5 shots in a playing card at 15 feet, close enough to see Luther's eyes when she pulled the trigger. That evening, Wyatt appeared at dinner time. Rosa invited him to stay, and he accepted. Unusual for him. Throughout the meal, Clara felt his eyes on her, watchful and concerned. "Walk with me," he said after they'd finished. They strolled along the creek in the fading light, neither speaking at first. Finally, Wyatt stopped beneath a massive cottonwood. "You got word from Luther." "How did you know?" "You've got that look again, like you're planning something." He picked up a stone, skipped it across the water. "Also, Jake told me about the rider from Tombstone. He says he'll be here by week's end." Wyatt nodded slowly. "There's something you should know. I've been to Prescott, talking to a federal marshal I knew in the war, a man named Virgil Thompson. He's been investigating Luther's business dealings." Clara's heart jumped. And he needs evidence, testimony from women who've been wronged, documents showing the false contracts." Wyatt turned to face her. "He needs someone on the inside. You want me to spy for a marshal? I want you to consider that there's a way to stop Luther that doesn't end with you hanging for murder." They were standing close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, the small scar on his jaw from some long-ago fight. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked softly. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "You know why." The kiss was inevitable as sunset, soft at first, then deeper as she responded. His arms came around her, and for a moment she forgot Luther, forgot revenge, forgot everything but the solid warmth of this good man who saw her truly. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. "I can't," Clara whispered. "Not until this is finished. Then finish it the right way." His voice was rough. "Help Marshal Thompson. I'll be there with you, every step." That night, Clara lay wakeful again, but for different reasons. Her lips still tingled from Wyatt's kiss. Her practical brown dress hung on the wardrobe door. But in her mind she saw herself in white, speaking vows to a man who'd earned them honestly. Foolish dreams. She was a bought woman with murder in her heart. She didn't deserve a man like Wyatt Boone. 2 days later, she was in the barn helping Miguel doctor a colicky horse when she heard riders approaching. Many riders. She peered through the barn door and her blood froze. Luther Briggs had arrived. He dismounted from a black stallion, still wearing the fine suit he favored for town business, now dusty from travel. He was exactly as his photograph had shown, tall, heavy-set, with mutton chop whiskers and cold eyes that swept the ranch yard possessively. Behind him rode 6 men, all armed. Among them, she recognized Carl Hutchins from that night in the hallway. His rat-like face split in an unpleasant grin. "Where's my bride?" Luther's voice carried clearly. "Tell the widow Bennett her intended has arrived." Clara smoothed her hair, squared her shoulders, and walked out to meet her fate. "Mr. Briggs." She even managed a curtsy. His eyes crawled over her like spiders. Well, the photograph didn't do you justice. My dear, you'll do nicely, very nicely indeed." He approached, reaching for her hand. It took every ounce of will not to recoil as his lips brushed her knuckles. "You're even prettier than your late husband promised," he said softly. For her ears alone, he had good taste, if poor judgment at cards. "I've been waiting for you, sir." Clara forced out, "Mr. Boone has been most kind in your absence." Luther's expression darkened. "Has he now? Well, Boone's services are no longer required." He turned to his men. "Send word to the Circle H. Tell him to keep to his own land from now on." The next days were torture. Luther installed himself in the house like a conquering general, demanding the best of everything. He made Clara sit with him at meals, regaling her with stories of his business triumphs while his hands found excuses to touch her shoulder, her hand, the small of her back. "We'll be married Saturday," he announced on his second night. "Judge Garrett will perform the ceremony here, more private that way." "So soon?" Clara's voice came out higher than intended. "Why wait? I've been patient long enough." His smile was predatory. "Haven't I, my dear?" She excused herself early, claiming a headache. In her room, she retrieved the Derringer from its new hiding place behind a loose baseboard. Saturday, 3 days to decide, kill him before the wedding or after? But Wyatt's words haunted her. "You're not a killer." On Thursday, salvation came from an unexpected source. She was gathering eggs when a young Mexican boy appeared at her elbow. "Señora, you drop this," he said loudly, pressing a folded paper into her hand. Then whispered, "From Señor Wyatt." The note was brief. "Marshal Thompson arriving tomorrow. Be ready to ride at dawn Saturday. Trust me, W." Clara burned the note and spent the rest of the day in a haze of indecision. Could she trust a federal marshal? Could she trust Wyatt? Or should she stick to her original plan? That evening brought her answer. After dinner, Luther dismissed the servants and poured himself brandy. "Come sit by me. Clara?" She perched on the edge of the settee, every muscle tense. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've had 3 other brides from back east. You're the first one who hasn't tried to run yet. What happened to them?" His smile was cold. "Oh, they found their situations unsuitable. Had to make other arrangements. There's always demand for pretty white women in certain establishments in San Francisco, if you understand my meaning." Clara's hand itched for her gun. "You sold them. Such an ugly word. I found them employment more suited to their temperaments." He sipped his brandy. "But you, my dear Clara, you're different, smarter, more resigned to your fate. I think we'll get along splendidly. And if we don't," his hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise, "then you'll learn, like the others did, that I always get what I'm owed. Your husband owed me $5,000. You'll work off that debt one way or another." She didn't fight his grip, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "I understand. Good." He released her. "Now, kiss your intended good night." She leaned in, pecked his cheek quickly, tasted brandy and cigar smoke and evil. Then she fled to her room, where she vomited until nothing remained but bile and fury. Friday dawned clear and hot. Clara went through the motions, breakfast with Luther, a fitting for the wedding dress he'd ordered from Tucson, a walk in the garden where he spoke of their future while she planned his death. But as afternoon wore on, she noticed something. Luther's men were nervous, checking their weapons, riding out in pairs to patrol. Carl Hutchins had a rifle across his saddle. "Trouble?" she asked Luther. "Nothing to concern you. Some rustlers hit the Rocking J last week. We're just being cautious." But Clara had learned to read the signs. This wasn't about rustlers. They were expecting something, or someone, that night, her last before the supposed wedding. Clara sat at her window watching clouds build over the mountains. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either she'd be Mrs. Luther Briggs, trapped forever, or she'd be a killer on the run. Or, if she trusted Wyatt, something else entirely. A pebble struck her window. She looked down to see a shadow beneath the cottonwoods. Her heart knew who it was before her eyes confirmed it. She crept downstairs and out the back door, into Wyatt's arms. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered against his chest. "If Luther finds out, I had to see you. Make sure you're all right." He pulled back to study her face in the moonlight. "Tomorrow, when the marshal comes, Luther's men are ready for something. They know." Wyatt cursed softly. "Then we change the plan. Can you be ready to ride at first light?" "Yes." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, like a man going to war. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember, you're not alone anymore." Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness, leaving Clara with a taste of hope on her lips and dawn approaching like a reckoning. Clara didn't sleep. She dressed in her riding clothes in the dark, packed only essentials in a small bag, and retrieved the derringer from its hiding place. The weight of it in her pocket was both comfort and curse. At first light, she crept from her room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Usually Rosa would be starting breakfast by now, but the kitchen was empty. Clara's unease grew as she made her way to the back door. "Going somewhere, my dear?" Luther stood in the parlor doorway, fully dressed, a revolver in his hand. Behind him, Carl Hutchins grinned like a wolf. "Just for an early ride," Clara said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. "In your traveling clothes? With a bag?" Luther shook his head. "I'm disappointed. Clara, here I thought you were smarter than the others." "I don't know what you mean. Your cowboy friend isn't as clever as he thinks. Did you really believe I wouldn't have men watching his ranch?" Luther stepped closer. "Marshal Thompson met with an unfortunate accident on the Prescott Road last night. Bandits, they say. Terrible tragedy." Clara's heart plummeted. The marshal, their hope, dead. As for Boone, he's probably discovering right about now that his barn is on fire. Hope he gets his horses out in time. Luther's smile was cold. "You see, my dear, I've survived in this business by staying one step ahead. Now, shall we proceed with our wedding? I'll never marry you." "Oh, but you will." He nodded to Carl, who grabbed Clara's arms, holding her as Luther searched her pockets. He found the derringer and chuckled. "Were you planning to shoot me at the altar? How theatrical." He pocketed the gun and backhanded her across the face. Clara tasted blood. "Take her to the old mission," Luther ordered. "We'll have a more private ceremony there, less chance of interruption." They bound her hands and threw her into a wagon. As they rolled out of the ranch, Clara saw smoke rising in the distance, the Circle H burning. Her fault. All of this was her fault. The old mission San Rafael sat 5 miles into the desert, abandoned for decades after Apache raids drove out the priests. Its adobe walls were crumbling, but the chapel remained intact, a fitting place for an unholy union. Luther's men secured the perimeter while he dragged Clara inside. The morning light filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust motes and decay. "Judge Garrett will be here within the hour," Luther said, shoving Clara toward the altar. "You'll say your vows nicely, or things will become very unpleasant, like they did for the others, the ones you sold." His face darkened. "They were investments that didn't pan out. You, however, have potential. A widow of good family, Educated, beautiful. You'll be quite useful in my business ventures. A respectable wife opens doors that a bachelor cannot access. I'll tell everyone what you are. No, you won't. He pulled out a piece of paper. Your late husband's signed confession. Embezzlement, fraud, theft. Quite the criminal. You're Thomas. One word from me and you'll hang alongside his memory. Clara stared at the document. Thomas's handwriting, detailing crimes she'd never known about. Another betrayal from beyond the grave. It's forgery, she said weakly. Prove it. Luther smiled. You see, my dear, I own you completely. Accept it, and life will be comfortable. Fight me, and... The chapel door burst open. Wyatt stood silhouetted against the morning sun. Clothes singed, face streaked with soot. Let her go, Luther. Boone. Luther drew his revolver. You're trespassing on private property. This is mission land, belongs to nobody. Wyatt stepped inside, and Clara saw he wasn't alone. 3 men flanked him, cowboys from the Circle H, all armed. Now let her go. 4 against 8? Poor odds. Cowboy. 5, said a new voice. A woman emerged from the shadows near the confessional. Young, pretty, with haunted eyes and a shotgun. Clara recognized her type immediately. Another of Luther's victims. Hello, Luther, the woman said. Remember me, Dolores Mitchell from St. Louis. You promised me a teaching position. Luther's composure cracked. You're dead. They said you died in San Francisco. Almost did, but I survived your employment and came back. Dolores pumped the shotgun. Been waiting 3 months for this moment. The tension stretched taut. 8 armed men, all with fingers on triggers. Death hanging in the dusty air. Clara felt time slow, saw everything with crystalline clarity, the sweat on Luther's neck, Wyatt's steady breathing, the tremor in Dolores's hands. Nobody has to die here, Wyatt said carefully. Luther, you're finished. Too many people know the truth now. Let Clara go, and you can ride out. Take your chances in Mexico. I built an empire, Luther snarled. I won't run like some common thief. Then you'll die like one, Dolores said. Clara saw Luther's finger tighten on the trigger, saw him start to swing the gun toward Wyatt. Without thinking, she threw herself sideways, hitting his arm. The shot went wide, and then the chapel exploded in gunfire. Clara hit the floor hard, rolling behind a broken pew. Bullets whined overhead. Men shouted. The air filled with powder smoke. She saw Carl Hutchins take a bullet in the shoulder, saw one of Wyatt's men fall. Through the chaos, she heard Luther cursing, saw him crawling toward the vestry door. He still had her derringer. She'd seen him pocket it. As he reached for the door handle, their eyes met. This isn't over, he mouthed. Then he was gone. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it began. In the ringing silence, Clara heard groaning, coughing, someone praying in Spanish. She struggled to her feet, hands still bound, searching frantically through the smoke. Wyatt? Here. He emerged from behind the altar, a graze on his temple bleeding freely. You hurt? No. She held out her bound hands, and he cut the ropes with his knife. Luther, let him go. He won't get far. But Clara was already running. She burst through the vestry door into blinding sunlight, saw Luther mounting a horse 50 yards away. Without thinking, she grabbed a rifle from a fallen man and raised it to her shoulder. Luther turned in the saddle, perhaps hearing her footsteps. His hand went for the derringer, but Clara was faster. The rifle cracked once. Luther Briggs tumbled from his horse and lay still in the red dirt. Clara stood frozen, the rifle heavy in her hands. She'd imagined this moment so many times, expected to feel triumph, satisfaction, relief. Instead, she felt empty. Wyatt's hand covered hers on the rifle. It's done, he said softly. It's over. She let him take the weapon, let him pull her against his chest, around them. The survivors were sorting themselves out. 3 of Luther's men were dead, including Carl. The rest had thrown down their weapons. Dolores stood over Luther's body, tears streaming down her face. He can't hurt anyone else now, the woman said. It's finished. as if her words were a signal. Riders appeared on the horizon. Many riders, coming fast. "That'll be Marshal Thompson," Wyatt said. Clara pulled back. "But Luther said—" "I sent word to 3 different marshals, 3 different routes." Wyatt's smile was grim. Luther wasn't the only one who could plan ahead. The federal marshal was a grizzled veteran who took in the scene with practiced eyes. He listened to the testimony. Clara's, Dolores's, 2 other women who emerged from the mission where they'd been hiding. He examined the forged documents Luther had been carrying, including contracts for selling women to brothels in San Francisco. "Seems like self-defense to me," Thompson concluded, looking at Clara. "Man was reaching for a weapon when you shot. Any jury would see it the same." The sun was high overhead by the time they finished. Luther's body was loaded onto a wagon, his surviving men arrested. The empire he'd built on women's misery had crumbled in a morning. Clara stood in the mission doorway, watching dust devils dance across the desert. Wyatt approached, stopped a respectful distance away. "What now?" she asked. "That's up to you. Ranch is yours, legally. Luther changed his will last week, leaving everything to his bride. Probably figured it would give him more control over you." The irony wasn't lost on her. "I don't want it. Too much blood on that land." "Then sell it. Start fresh somewhere else." He paused. "Or stay. Help me rebuild the circle, H. I could use a partner." She turned to look at him, this good man who'd risked everything for her. "Is that a business proposition, Mr. Boone?" "If you want it to be." He stepped closer. "Or it could be something more. Your choice. Clara, for the first time in a long while, you get to choose." Standing there in the ruins of the old mission, with the past dead behind her and the future uncertain ahead, Clara made her choice. She kissed him in the doorway where no vows had been spoken, where violence had purchased freedom, where one story ended and another began. When they broke apart, she said, "We'll need to rebuild your barn first." "Our barn," he corrected, and Clara felt something broken inside her begin to heal. They rode away from San Rafael together, leaving the mission to its ghosts and the desert to reclaim what men had built on suffering behind them. Dolores and the other women headed toward town and new possibilities. Ahead lay hard work, honest love, and a life chosen rather than imposed. The mail-order bride had pointed a gun at the man who'd bought her, and in doing so had purchased her own freedom. It wasn't the ending Clara had planned, but as Wyatt's hand found hers across the space between their horses, she thought it might be the beginning she deserved. The smoke still rose from the Circle H when they arrived, black columns twisting into the afternoon sky. The barn was gone, reduced to charred timbers and ash, but the house stood intact, and the horses, thank God, were safe in the pasture where Jose had freed them at the first sign of trouble. Clara dismounted slowly, her body finally registering the morning's violence. Her hands shook as she surveyed the damage. This destruction was her fault, brought by her connection to Luther. "Don't," Wyatt said quietly, reading her thoughts. "This isn't on you. He burned your barn because of me. He burned my barn because he was an evil man who couldn't stand losing." Wyatt's jaw was tight. Would have happened eventually anyway. Luther and I were heading for a reckoning. Maria emerged from the house, crossing herself at the sight of them. "Senor Wyatt, we thought, when we saw the smoke—" "We're all right," Wyatt assured her. "Anyone hurt?" "No. Jose got everyone out, but the barn—" She shook her head sadly. "They spent the rest of the day in triage. The ranch hands worked to clear debris and save what could be salvaged." Clara threw herself into helping Maria prepare food for the workers, needing the physical activity to quiet her racing mind. As evening approached, Marshal Thompson arrived with paperwork. "The territorial judge has ruled," he announced. "Given the evidence and witness testimony, no charges will be filed regarding Luther Briggs's death. It's officially self-defense." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "And his men, those who survived, will stand trial for assault, arson, and conspiracy. They're eager to talk, hoping for leniency." Thompson paused. We've also found records at Briggs's office. Names of women, transactions. Miss Mitchell was right. He'd been trafficking in human misery for years. After the marshal left, Clara stood amid the ruins of the barn. The setting sun painted everything golden red, beautiful despite the destruction. Wyatt found her there. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About that night, when Luther came back. You don't owe me explanations." "Yes, I do." She took a breath. "He made me kiss him good night, just on the cheek, but still. I felt dirty. Contaminated. I wanted you to know before anything else happens between us." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed her palm gently. "You survived, Clara. That's all that matters." That night, exhausted and emotional, they sat on the porch as they had days ago, though it felt like years. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset, and Wyatt fetched a blanket, wrapping it around both their shoulders. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Thompson's right. The Double B is yours legally." Clara had been thinking about this. "I want to sell it. Use the money to help the women Luther hurt. Dolores and the others, they need funds to start over. That's generous. It's justice. That ranch was built on their suffering." She leaned into his warmth. "But I want to keep some back, to rebuild what was destroyed here. Clara, I can't take Luther's money. Not Luther's money. Mine. Payment for what was stolen from me." She turned to face him. "Let me do this, Wyatt. Let me help build something good where he tried to create ruin." He studied her face in the moonlight. Partners. Partners. The kiss that sealed their agreement was different from their desperate embraces at the mission. Slow, deep, full of promise rather than fear. When they finally broke apart, Clara was trembling for entirely new reasons. "Stay," Wyatt said simply. She understood what he was asking. Not just tonight, but always. Stay here, with him, in this place that could be home. "Yes," she whispered. He led her inside, to his room, sparse but clean, with a view of the mountains through the window. Their coming together was nothing like she'd imagined during those dark nights planning revenge. Where she'd expected desperation, there was tenderness. Where she'd anticipated guilt, there was only rightness. Wyatt's hands were gentle as they undressed her, reverent as they mapped her body. He kissed each bruise Luther's men had left, as if he could erase the violence with tenderness. When he hesitated, she pulled him closer. "I'm not fragile," she said. "Not anymore." "I know." His voice was rough. "That's what amazes me." They made love slowly, learning each other in the darkness. Clara had only known Thomas's fumbling enthusiasm and had expected awkwardness. Instead, she discovered passion, her own as much as Wyatt's. She discovered that her body, which had felt like a burden and a commodity, could be a source of joy. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to coyotes sing to the stars. Wyatt traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," he said quietly. "Should have said it sooner." "I love you too." The words came easily, surprising her with their truth. "Even though you kept warning me off revenge. Especially because of that," he corrected. And she laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. They dozed, woke to make love again, slept properly as dawn approached. Clara dreamed not of violence, but of building, barns and homes and futures. Morning brought reality. There was much work to be done. Clara dressed in a borrowed shirt and trousers of Wyatt's, practical clothes for practical labor. Together they rode to the Double B to begin the process of dismantling Luther's empire. Rosa wept when she saw Clara. "Senora, we heard such terrible things." "All true, I'm afraid, but it's over now." Clara explained her plans to sell, promised that all the workers would receive generous severance pay in Luther's office. She found what she'd feared: files on dozens of women, contracts that weren't contracts but bills of sale. Each name was a story of desperation and betrayal. She bundled everything for Marshal Thompson, evidence for trials yet to come. "Look at this," Wyatt said, pulling out a hidden ledger. He kept records of where he sent them. Clara studied the entries. San Francisco, Denver, even New Orleans. We need to get this to the authorities in those cities. Some of these women might still be trapped. They spent 3 days at the Double B cataloging Luther's crimes and arranging for the ranch's sale. A cattle consortium from Tucson expressed interest, and Clara negotiated fiercely, getting top dollar. The money would go far toward helping Luther's victims rebuild their lives. On their last evening there, Clara stood in the blue room where she'd spent so many nights planning murder. It seemed like another lifetime. Another woman who'd hidden a gun under this mattress. No regrets, Wyatt asked from the doorway. None. She meant it. I came here for revenge, but I found justice instead. And you? Smooth talker, he teased, but his eyes were serious. Are you ready to go home? Home. The Circle H with its burned barn and wounded pride. Its good people and honest work. Yes, it was home now. They returned to find unexpected help. Word had spread through the valley about what Luther had done, what Clara had endured. Neighbors who'd feared Luther in life now came to support those he'd wronged. They brought lumber, tools, willing hands to help rebuild. Good folks around here, observed Sam Henderson from the Rocking J. Just needed that bastard gone before they could show it. The barn raising took a week. Clara worked alongside the men, learning to handle tools, gaining calluses and confidence. Dolores Mitchell came to help too, bringing 2 other women Luther had employed. They were tentative at first, but Clara's welcome was genuine. And soon they were laughing together like sisters forged in shared survival. I'm going back to St. Louis, Dolores told Clara one evening. My family thinks I'm dead, but now I can go home. I'm glad, Clara said, meaning it. You deserve that fresh start. So do you. Dolores smiled. You found yours. Looks like... That night, as Clara and Wyatt stood before their new barn, raw lumber golden in the sunset, she thought about fresh starts and second chances. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate widow boarding a train with murder in her heart. Now she was a woman with choices, with love, with a future she'd chosen for herself. What are you thinking? Wyatt asked, arms wrapped around her from behind. That the mail-order bride got more than she bargained for. So did the cowboy who picked her up at the depot, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Inside the new barn, in fresh straw that smelled of possibility rather than ash. They celebrated their rebuilding in the most ancient way, with joy, with passion, with promises made by bodies rather than words. As Clara cried out her pleasure into the desert night, she thought fleetingly of that woman with the derringer, consumed by hate and plans for blood. That woman was gone, burned away like the old barn, replaced by someone stronger, a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge was not pulling the trigger, but choosing to build rather than destroy. The stars wheeled overhead, constant as always, caring nothing for human drama, but beneath them, in a barn built by community and consecrated by love. Clara Bennett and Wyatt Boone wrote their own story of redemption in the ashes of what had been burned away. The territorial courthouse in Prescott stood like a monument to civilization's reach into the wilderness, red brick and white columns attempting to impose order on a land that recognized none. Clara adjusted her best dress, the dark blue silk she'd bought with money from the Double B sale, and tried to calm her nerves. You don't have to do this, Wyatt said for the 10th time that morning. Yes, I do. She squeezed his hand. Those women deserve to have their stories heard. Luther's dead, but his associates aren't. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the mail-order bride who'd killed Luther Briggs, and curiosity seekers filled every bench. Clara recognized several faces, ranch wives who'd whispered about her in town, men who'd done business with Luther and looked away from his darker dealings. All rise for the Honorable Judge Frederick Morrison. The judge was younger than Clara expected, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, as the prosecutor called his first witness. Clara studied the defendants, 3 men who'd helped Luther transport women, forged documents, threatened families into silence. They looked smaller without their boss. Ordinary evil rather than grand. The prosecution calls Mrs. Clara Bennett. Clara rose on unsteady legs. The walk to the witness stand felt eternal, every eye tracking her movement. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, though truth was a complex thing when survival had required so many lies. Mrs. Bennett, the prosecutor began. Please tell the court how you came to be at Luther Briggs's ranch. Clara had rehearsed this story, but speaking it aloud to a room full of strangers was different. She told them about Thomas's debts, the forged contract, the threats that had driven her west. I believed I had no choice. She said, Mr. Briggs made it clear that refusing would result in my arrest for my late husband's supposed crimes. And when you arrived at the Double B? I was told Mr. Briggs was delayed on business. I later learned he was in Tombstone, gambling. She kept her voice steady. I also learned I was not the first woman he'd brought west under false pretenses. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Harrington, rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Bennett, isn't it true you went west intending to kill Luther Briggs? A murmur ran through the courtroom. Clara met his gaze directly. I went west because I was compelled to. What I intended changed based on what I discovered there. You were found with a concealed weapon, were you not? Yeah, a Derringer pistol for protection. The frontier is dangerous for women traveling alone. Yet, you used a rifle to kill Mr. Briggs. After he'd kidnapped me, held me against my will, and threatened my life. Clara's voice grew stronger. After I'd learned about the other women he'd sold into bondage. Yes, Mr. Harrington, I shot Luther Briggs. Any person in my position would have done the same. The questioning continued for hours. Harrington tried to paint her as a calculating killer, but the prosecutor had done his work. Document after document was introduced. Contracts, letters, financial records showing Luther's trafficking network. Then came the other witnesses. Dolores Mitchell, back from St. Louis to testify, told her story with quiet dignity. 2 more women followed, each tale adding to the horror. By the time Marshal Thompson took the stand to describe the scene at the mission, several jury members looked sick. During a recess, Clara stood on the courthouse balcony, gulping fresh air. The town spread below her, proper storefronts and respectable citizens living their ordered lives. How many of them had known what Luther was doing? How many had chosen not to see? You're doing well, a voice said behind her. She turned to find an older woman, expensively dressed, with shrewd eyes behind wire spectacles. Mrs. Abigail Foster. The woman introduced herself. I run the foster home for displaced women in San Francisco. I've been following this case with interest. Oh, we've rescued several of Luther's victims over the years. Never could prove the connection until now. She studied Clara. You've shown remarkable courage. My dear, I had remarkable help. Clara glanced through the window to where Wyatt waited. Steady as always. Yes, mister. Boone seems a good man. They're rarer than gold out here. Mrs. Foster handed her a calling card. If you ever need anything, or if you find more women needing assistance, please contact me. The afternoon brought more testimony. Luther's associates crumbled under questioning, each trying to shift blame to the dead man. By the time closing arguments began, their guilt was evident. The prosecutor stood before the jury. 12 men, ranchers and merchants and ordinary citizens. Gentlemen, you've heard testimony about a systematic scheme to entrap, transport, and sell women like cattle. The defendants claim they were just following Luther Briggs's orders, but following orders is no excuse for evil. Harrington's closing was desperate, focusing on legal technicalities rather than innocence. When he sat down, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison's instructions to the jury were clear. They filed out, and the waiting began. Clara sat with Wyatt in the hallway, his presence a comfort. However this goes, she began. It'll go fine, he interrupted. You told the truth. That matters. But Clara knew better. Truth didn't always triumph, especially when powerful men's interests were threatened. Luther had had friends, business associates who might prefer this scandal buried with him. The jury returned in 2 hours. Quick verdicts usually meant conviction, but Clara couldn't breathe until the foreman stood. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others muttered angrily. The defendants were led away in shackles, and Clara felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. Outside, reporters waited with questions. "Mrs. Bennett, how does it feel to see justice done?" "It feels like a beginning," Clara said carefully. "These men will pay for their crimes, but there are still women out there who need help. This isn't over." Will you continue Luther Briggs' ranch operations?" "The Double B has been sold. The proceeds will go to helping Mr. Briggs' victims start new lives." "And your own plans?" Clara looked at Wyatt, who stood protective at her shoulder. "I plan to live freely, for the first time in my life. That's victory enough." They left town as the sun set, riding side by side through landscape painted gold and purple. The trial had dredged up painful memories, but Clara felt cleaner somehow, as if speaking the truth had washed away some of Luther's stain. "Proud of you," Wyatt said simply. "I couldn't have done it without you, without knowing you were there. I'll always be there, if you'll have me." It wasn't a formal proposal. They were past the need for such conventions. But Clara heard the question beneath his words. "I'll have you," she said, "for as long as you'll stay. Then you're stuck with me forever." They made camp that night under stars, too weary to push through to the ranch. As they lay by the fire, Clara thought about justice and revenge, about the thin line between them. She'd wanted Luther dead, yes, but what she'd really wanted was for him to answer for his crimes. Today, through the testimony of his victims, he had— "Do you think they believed me?" she asked. "The jury, the town, do you think they really understood what he did to us?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Some did. Others maybe couldn't let themselves understand. It's an ugly truth that women can be bought and sold in America. Easier to look away. I won't let them look away. Not anymore." Clara sat up, sudden energy filling her. "Mrs. Foster gave me her card. She helps women in San Francisco. What if we did something similar here, a place where women like Dolores could come for help? Using Luther's money, using justice money, turning his evil into something good." Wyatt pulled her back down beside him. "You're something— Clara Bennett. Month ago you were planning murder. Now you're planning rescue missions." "Plans change," she said, remembering her desperate scheming in that blue bedroom. "People change. Not everyone. You were always this strong, just took a while to show it." They made love under the stars, gentle and slow, a celebration of survival and new beginnings. When Clara cried out, it wasn't from pain or desperation, but from joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy at being alive, being free, being loved. The next morning brought them home to the Circle H. Maria had breakfast waiting, and Jose had news. 3 more neighbors had offered to help with fall roundup. Men who'd avoided Wyatt before when Luther's shadow hung over him. "Things are different now," Jose said with satisfaction. "People remember Senor Wyatt helped them. They want to help back." Over the following days, Clara wrote letters. To Mrs. Foster, to Dolores, to authorities in cities where Luther had sent women. She created a network of correspondence, tracking down victims, offering help from the fund she'd established. Some wrote back with gratitude. Others never answered, their shame or circumstances too great. But slowly, stories emerged. Women reunited with families who'd thought them dead. Women given train fare to start over in new towns. Women who simply needed to know someone believed them, that their suffering was witnessed. "You're doing good work," Wyatt said one evening, finding her at the desk surrounded by letters. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough to balance what he did. Maybe not, but it's something." He massaged her shoulders, working out knots of tension. "Can't save everyone, Clara, but you're saving some. That matters. She turned in her chair to look at him. This man who'd taken her part when he had no reason to, who'd risked everything for a stranger's safety. Why did you help me? That first day, you could have delivered me to Luther and washed your hands of it all. Wyatt's smile was rueful. Knew from the moment I saw you that you were going to be trouble. Also knew I couldn't let you face it alone. Love at first sight, recognition at first sight. Saw a fighter trying to pretend she wasn't. Couldn't let Luther break that spirit. He almost did. Almost doesn't count. Not in horseshoes, and not in life. He kissed her forehead. Come to bed. Letters will keep till morning. As Clara followed him to their room, their bed, their life together, she thought about the woman who'd boarded that train in Philadelphia with a gun and a plan for revenge. That woman had been shaped by men's choices, Thomas's weakness, Luther's evil, society's indifference. But this woman, the one who shared Wyatt's bed and wrote letters to help strangers and planned a future of her own making, she was shaped by her own choices. The choice to trust, the choice to testify, the choice to transform blood money into hope. Justice wasn't as satisfying as revenge might have been. It was messier, complicated by law and testimony and the slow work of rebuilding lives. But it was also cleaner, leaving room for what came after, love and work and the simple pleasure of choosing her own path under the vast Arizona sky. Spring came early to the Arizona territory that year, painting the desert in impossible colors. Purple lupines, golden poppies, the shocking pink of prickly pear blooms. Clara stood on the porch of the Circle H, watching the sunrise transform the mountains from black to rose to gold, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. You're up early, Wyatt said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep, the baby's restless. She accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its steam. Or maybe I'm restless. Second thoughts? Never. She leaned into his warmth. Just thinking about how different life is now. A year ago, I was planning murder. Now I'm planning a nursery. Wyatt's hand covered hers on her belly. Life has a way of surprising us. The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted their quiet moment. Clara recognized the driver, Sam Henderson from the Rocking J, but his passenger was a stranger, a young woman, barely 20, with the hollow-eyed look Clara knew too well. Morning, folks, Sam called. Sorry to disturb you so early, but this young lady was asking after Mrs. Bennett in town, said it was important. The woman climbed down carefully, clutching a worn carpet bag. Are you Clara Bennett, the one who stopped Luther Briggs? I am. Clara stepped forward. How can I help you? The woman's story tumbled out, another of Luther's victims, trapped in a Denver brothel until news of his death and the trials reached her. She'd saved for months to make the journey to Arizona. I heard you help women like us, she said. I don't have anywhere else to go. You do now, Clara said firmly. Come inside. Maria will make you breakfast, and we'll figure out what you need. As Maria bustled the young woman, Sarah her name was, into the kitchen, Wyatt squeezed Clara's shoulder. The house is getting crowded. That's the 3rd this month. I know. We need to find a better solution. That solution came from an unexpected source. The old mission where Luther had met his end was up for sale, the Catholic Church having abandoned it decades ago. When Clara heard, she knew immediately what to do. It's perfect, she told Wyatt over dinner. Close enough to town for supplies and medical care, but private enough for women who need to heal. We could convert it into a proper refuge. That place holds dark memories for you, which is exactly why we should transform it, take a place of violence and make it a place of healing. She reached across the table to take his hand. What better revenge against Luther than to use his money to create sanctuary in the place where he tried to break me? The purchase and renovation took 2 months. Neighbors who had once feared Luther now contributed labor and materials. The chapel where gunfire had echoed became a common room for meals and gatherings. The old cells where monks once prayed became bedrooms for women starting over. Clara insisted on one particular change. The wall where she'd shot Luther was knocked down entirely, opening the space to light and air, where his blood had stained the earth, she planted a garden. The Clara Bennett Home for Women. Dolores read from the freshly painted sign. She'd returned from St. Louis to help run the facility, her own healing making her perfect to guide others. It's beautiful. Clara. It's necessary, Clara corrected, but she was proud. In 6 months, they'd helped reunite 17 women with their families and found respectable employment for a dozen more. The opening ceremony drew visitors from across the territory. Mrs. Foster came from San Francisco, bringing donations and connections to employment opportunities. Marshal Thompson attended in full uniform, a formal blessing on their work. Even Judge Morrison made an appearance. You've done something remarkable here, Mrs. Bennett. The judge said, turn tragedy into hope. Mrs. Boone, Clara corrected gently. She and Wyatt had married quietly the month before. A simple ceremony with Jose and Maria as witnesses. And I had help. As the celebration continued, Clara found herself back in the garden, needing a moment of quiet. The baby, due in just a few weeks, was active, responding perhaps to her emotions. You all right? Wyatt found her there, as she'd known he would. Just remembering. That morning when I stood here with a rifle in my hands, I thought my life was over, that I'd either die or become a killer with no chance for happiness. What changed your mind? Clara considered. You did. When you said I wasn't a killer, you saw something in me I'd forgotten existed. You saw past the anger to the person underneath. I saw the truth. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands gentle on her swollen belly. Saw a woman strong enough to choose justice over revenge, love over hate. I almost chose differently. Almost doesn't count. Remember? He kissed her temple. You chose right. Clara, look what you've built from that choice. She looked at the mission transformed, at the women finding safety within its walls, at the garden blooming where blood had been spilled. Most of all, she felt the life growing inside her, proof that the future could be different from the past. Mrs. Boone? Sarah appeared in the doorway, still tentative but already looking healthier after just a week of good food and safety. Some of the ladies were wondering if you'd tell the story about Luther and everything. Clara had told the story many times now, to prosecutors and journalists, to donors and the women who came seeking shelter. Each telling got a little easier, the pain a little more distant. Gather everyone in the common room, she said. I'll be right there. As Sarah hurried off, Clara took one last look at the sunset painting the desert in shades of fire. Somewhere out there were more women trapped as she had been, but also somewhere out there were people willing to help, to build bridges back to freedom. Ready? Wyatt asked. Ready, she said, and meant it. The common room was full. Residents, staff, and visitors all gathered to hear the tale of the mail-order bride who'd pointed a gun at the man who'd bought her and chose justice instead. Clara stood before them, one hand on her belly, the other in Wyatt's, and began, I came to Arizona territory with murder in my heart. As she spoke, Clara saw her younger self in the faces watching her, frightened, angry, desperate for hope. She told them about the gun hidden in her luggage, the plans for revenge, the moment she'd pulled the trigger not for vengeance but for survival. She told them about choosing to testify, to use Luther's wealth for healing, to build instead of destroy. The hardest thing, she concluded, was learning that I deserved to be saved, that my life had value beyond being property or seeking revenge. Every woman who walks through these doors needs to learn the same thing. You are worth more than what was done to you. Applause filled the room, and Clara saw tears on many faces. As the gathering broke up, women approached her with whispered thanks, shared stories, tentative smiles, each one a small victory against the Luther Briggs of the world. Later, as the mission settled into nighttime quiet, Clara and Wyatt made their way back to the Circle H. The house was dark except for a lamp Maria had left burning, welcoming them home. No regrets? Wyatt asked as they prepared for bed, echoing his question from months ago. Clara considered as she brushed out her hair. looking at their reflection in the mirror, her body round with pregnancy, his face weathered by sun and wind, but softened by contentment. "One regret," she said finally. "I wish I'd shot his hat off instead of killing him. Would have been more satisfying to see him in prison, growing old behind bars while his victims thrived." Wyatt laughed, the sound rich in the quiet room. "Bloodthirsty woman. Good thing I love you." "Good thing indeed," she agreed, turning for his kiss. That night, Clara dreamed not of violence, but of the future. Their child taking first steps in the garden. More women finding sanctuary at the mission. The slow work of healing spreading like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. She woke at dawn to the baby kicking and Wyatt's steady breathing beside her. Through the window, she could see the first light touching the mountains, painting them in shades of hope. The mail-order bride had come west with a gun and a plan for revenge. But in the end, she'd found something more powerful than bullets. The courage to choose love over hate, building over burning, life over death. As Clara rose to start the day, she touched her belly and whispered to the child within, "Your story will be different, born in freedom, raised in love, with all the choices I never had." Outside, the desert bloomed with spring's promise, and somewhere a coyote sang the sun up into the sky. It was, Clara thought, a perfect morning for new beginnings. In the distance, she could see riders approaching, maybe more women seeking shelter, maybe neighbors coming to help, maybe just cowboys passing through. But whoever they were, Clara would meet them with open hands instead of a hidden gun, with hope instead of hate. She had traveled far from that desperate woman on the stagecoach, farther in spirit than in miles, and though the journey had been hard, she wouldn't change a step of it. Every choice, every pain, every small victory had led her here, to this life, this love, this chance to transform suffering into salvation. The mail-order bride had indeed kissed the cowboy and pointed a gun at the man who'd sent her, but in the end, she'd discovered that the greatest revenge was living well, loving freely, and lighting candles for other women still trapped in darkness. As Wyatt joined her on the porch, coffee in hand and love in his eyes, Clara knew that her story, their story, was just beginning, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't wait to see what came next. Thank you for joining us around the Wild West Campfire for this tale of courage, redemption, and love against all odds. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's share stories of our own. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales from the American frontier. And share your thoughts about Clara and Wyatt's journey. Did justice triumph over revenge? What would you have done in Clara's boots? Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to redemption.